What's good, everybody? Good evening. Just got a little spaghetti sauce in my face. It's terrible. So I don't know about you, but I just got done watching Kristi Noem, Governor Kristi Noem's interview on Tucker Carlson. Credit to her for deciding to go on Tucker Carlson. I'll give her that much, but that's like the only thing I will give her today. The failure to properly address the reasons why she's vetoing this bill that the South Dakota legislature has passed. It's just very, very bizarre. And we'll get into that in a second. So there are two basic reasons that Noem said that she would veto this bill, right? Basically, and I was listening to the interview, she had two basic arguments. The first of which is that she would get into a battle with the NCAA and lose that battle. And she would lose a court battle. Basically, the NCAA would sue her and would ban ban South Dakota athletes from participating and sue her, and that she would lose in court. And the second reason was that it would be the bill itself would be a trial lawyer's dream, as she said, a trial lawyer's dream. So I want to analyze both of those in turn and why I think they're pathetic. They really are like very, very unimpressive reasons to say that, why that veto makes sense. And there's a good article from John Schwepp of the American Principles Project that I'm sort of kind of borrowing off of here. But the basic idea is that, basically what Noem attempted to do is what's called style and form veto. So let me zoom in here so you guys get a better sense of what's happening. Style and form veto is a unique thing in the South Dakota Constitution. It allows the governor to return a bill with specific recommendations for change. It's effectively like Noem is trying to turn it into a line item veto, which is not something that's present in the federal system. And really, it's not present. It's supposed to be present in South Dakota. But what she did is first off, her veto wants to dramatically change the operative language of the bill from and say that essentially a team or sport designated as being female is available only to participants who are female. And she wanted to add, quote, as reflected on the birth certificate or affidavit provided upon initial enrollment. And as John Schwepp points out, you can change your birth certificate in South Dakota. So that effectively renders it meaningless, right? Like if you're trying to prevent biological males from competing in women's sports, then you actually have to not allow it to be essentially controlled, in this case, by a document that can be revised post hoc. So basically she's gutted the bill entirely. Section 2 requires, in South Dakota, requires student athletes to submit a written statement, and including an assurance that they haven't taken performance enhancing drugs. I have no idea why you would gut that part of the bill. That seems like a very basic statement to expect of your student athletes, that they're not taking steroids. I don't understand why that would be incompatible with NCAA regulations. And it's terrible. And then the worst part, and this is something that really annoyed me as a lawyer, and I think this is something she talked about on Tucker, how it's like this bill is a trial lawyer's dream. And I think this is what she's talking about. There is a portion of the bill passed by the South Dakota legislature that would provide a cause of action to women who are unfairly deprived of athletic opportunities being displaced by biological males. So a private cause of action is something I'm very familiar with and that I've been personally advocating as part of any sort of federal regulation of social media. For a long time, I've been talking about let's give citizens a right to sue Facebook and Twitter in the event that they are wrongly censored. And what this bill is trying to do, it also created a private right of action. It said, but in the context of women's sports, it said if you are a woman who is wrongly denied athletic opportunities because a school allowed biological males to compete in women's sports, and you have a right to sue. That's a great enforcement mechanism, right? No school wants to be tied up in litigation for years on end as a result of having allowed biological males to compete. So this is a great piece of legislation. But all Kristi Noem did is she did the old Republican trick. She's like, oh, well, it's a trial lawyer's dream. Because why do we assume trial lawyers are bad? First, I don't know. Generally, they vote Democrat, but trial lawyers are just there to help plaintiffs enforce private causes of action. And if the private cause of action is one that protects women's sports and fights against a leftist cultural norm, then maybe in this case, the trial lawyers should have some dreams. It's okay. Basically what Noem is saying is that any bill that gives you American citizens the right to enforce a right against some institution or company is bad because trial lawyers benefit. That's nonsense and absolutely ridiculous. And it means that basically the only other mechanism of regulation or getting people to comply is essentially a bureaucracy and a regulatory system, which is not necessarily what you want in this context. You don't want a giant bureaucracy regulating sports in the state of South Dakota. You want the schools to stop it. And if they wrongfully allow biological males to compete, you want them to be sued by the victims of that allowance. And that's what Noem is banning. And so it is so frivolous of her to say, oh, it's a trial lawyer's dream. Like, that's such BS, such a BS talking point that comes from the perspective of, oh, I'm not going to give you the women who've been wronged in my state the right to sue because God forbid trial lawyers benefit. Like, that's absolute nonsense. So Barbara Schreiber is saying layperson speak. Like, okay, so think about it. Essentially what this bill is saying, imagine if you have your free speech rights violated, right? You're trying to speak on a college campus and somebody says you're not allowed to. How do you go into court? Well, why are you able to get an injunction? Well, you have what's called a private right of action, which means if you are denied your right to speak on a public facility, then you've been wrong. That's a constitutional wrong. You are able to go into court and sue and get an injunction, an order from the court saying you're allowed to speak. So what the South Dakota bill did was, in the context of women's sports, it said, if you are a female, a biological female, and you weren't able to compete, you weren't able to make the team on a college team because that college team had biological males competing in women's sports and you were pushed down, then you have a right to go into court and sue the college and say the college wronged me by denying me this opportunity. That's what the bill would have done. Kristi Noem said that's bad, right? It's bad that women have that right because trial lawyers will be able to make money from those lawsuits. Like, really? Like, that's why it's bad? Are you serious? Like, God forbid the trial lawyers make money protecting females from being able to sue in court. So Barbara says she gets it now. And then the second reason, I think, is she says, well, the NCAA won't tolerate it. I'm like, well, fight the NCAA. You have the high ground in terms of public opinion. And I think that was one of the points Tucker made. He's like, so you're giving in to the NCAA, like the NCAA has told you they'll fight you in court and beat you, and you've just given up. Like, that's stupid. Your Senate has passed a bill. Just go out there and defend it. And if they win, they win, but fight, right? Like, fight, like, this is craven. And I mean, it's such gaslighting. She's saying, well, I'm setting up a coalition to fight and protect Title IX, but you're vetoing the bill that would have protected female sports. So terrible, terrible stuff. Very unimpressed by Kristi Noem's performance on Tucker. I mean, the only credit she gets is that she went on to defend it, but it wasn't there. Maud Ricky asks, is this the last Chamberlain Periscope? No, there are going to be a few more in the coming week. As long as it's up, we're going to keep doing Periscopes. By the way, if you are, if like the way to help and support us and get access to Chamberlain live streams in the future, I'm not sure if Twitter will be good. So go ahead and youtube.com/Human Events and subscribe, youtube.com/Human Events, and to subscribe. That really does help me. Like, it is a personal, serious request. If you haven't done that, I've spent 3 years on this platform, roughly 2 to 3, almost 4 years. And seeing it disappear means that those of you who are getting notifications won't get them in the future. And it's really sad to kind of lose it. So yeah, I mean, Van Band makes an interesting point that she had to do this. She's getting roasted. I'm like, I think you're right. She had to, but she looked terrible. It was a really pathetic decision on her part. And a very, very, it will be very bad. Somebody says, will I go on Twitter live? It supposedly looks exactly like Periscope. I hope that it does. If it does, I will continue to do it. I mean, right now I effectively multi-stream. So I go on Twitter and Facebook and Periscope all at once, and that allows me to do it. But I assume if you guys follow me on Twitter, you'll get those notifications. At some point, I may ask you to, I don't know what Twitter is going to do to make it easier for people who want to get notified when you go live to make that happen. Since the way that used to be done was having people follow your Periscope. How is Amazon threatening a governor to change the law legal? That's an interesting question. That's basically what lobbyists do all the time. I mean, implicitly, what lobbyists do is saying that, you should, and it doesn't matter what institution they're lobbying on behalf of. They could be lobbying on behalf of the NRA and 5 million gun owners, or just some private company. But they're saying, like, basically that's how they manage to get what they want all the time. That's what lobbyists do. They try and explain to politicians why they should pass laws the correct way. And that's, there's a free speech right to do that, but there are also constraints on it. Solomon Kane says that Republicans always find a way to snatch defeat from victory. I don't understand why Kristi Noem has done this. This was a person who was going to be a very serious and competitive political figure, and she's just giving up. I mean, it's absurd, and it's disappointing, really, I think. But she's killing her political career with this. Can we have celebrated Colin Periscope for your last one? Absolutely. I'll certainly do that on the last Periscope on at the end of March. Okay. So I don't want this one to go on too long, but basically, like, Kristi Noem's answers don't make sense. If the NCAA is threatening to beat you in court, then that's a fight you need to have. Nobody's guaranteed to win or lose in court. You should fight on the ground that you're defending what your citizens want, which is to protect women's sports. And if the NCAA wants to go on offense and say, no, it's important that biological males be allowed to compete in women's sports, make them take that position. Don't just, give up before you've had a public fight where you have the public opinion on our side. And then the second reason, which is that this is a trial lawyer's team, is absolute nonsense. Having a private right of action for South Dakota citizens if they are wronged, that's a basic enforcement mechanism for a million different laws, and saying that you shouldn't protect the right of biological females in South Dakota to compete because, God forbid, trial lawyers make money. Absolute nonsense. You should reject that out of hand. It's a bizarre, it's a very, very dishonest talking point. It's one that comes from, like, I'm sure she has some, like, the Chamber of Commerce types who are just handing that talking point to her on a silver platter and saying, like, aha, this is how you convince Republicans that they should, just sit with their hands tied and not do anything about the biological males competing in women's sports. Like, that's how you do it. You say trial lawyers would benefit. Absolute nonsense. Trial lawyers are just an enforcement mechanism in the same way that a bureaucracy would be an enforcement mechanism. If you have a law and you want people to obey it, somebody has to enforce it somehow. And, trial lawyers are just one mechanism to doing that. So that's why this is dumb. Yeah, as Biscuits Benny says, it's complete balderdash and Tommy Rot. Great words. Balderdash and Tommy Rot. Shame on her. She's done. I agree. We in California must have other states help us fight this. Which state can do it now? Any state can do it. There's nothing stopping your state from doing this. I mean, unless you're scared of the NCAA throwing their weight around with your colleges. And you shouldn't be. You shouldn't be. Yeah, I agree with Macca. She's totally soiled her reputation. Okay, so that's what I got. I don't want to go too long. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.